Hello, hello. Welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is your host, Rachel Gregory, and today is a solo episode where I'm going to be chatting all about mistakes that I have personally made in the past and mistakes that I've seen a lot of my clients make in the past when it comes to building muscle. So I work with a lot of female clients. I do work with some male clients, but most of my clients are females, including those who are one-on-one clients and then those who have gone through my Keto For Women program and the Muscle Science for Women program. If you're not familiar with those programs, I will link them both in the show notes so you can check them out, or you can just go to my website, metflexlife.com, and click on the programs tab. All of the information is up there. But I see a lot of, and like I said, I've made a lot of mistakes in the past, especially when it comes to training for body composition goals and specifically building muscle. And we know that, I've voiced this in the past, many, many times, that especially when it comes to females and looking to actually change your body composition and maybe get that quote unquote toned look or have, definition in your muscles and things like that. That all comes down to having actual muscle, right? And being able to build muscle. And so there's a lot of common mistakes and misconceptions that, or just things that people aren't focusing on that are kind of hindering your results when it comes to being able to build muscle and look the way that you want to look, right? So in today's episode, I'm going to be breaking down a list of the 10 most common mistakes that, like I said, that I've made in the past and that I see a lot of women making when it comes to building muscle. And these 10 mistakes I've just kind of put together over the past really just a year. I've kind of put them into their own categories. And then within each category, there's obviously lots of different things we can dive into. So today I'm going to kind of list out the 10 different mistakes that I personally see and chat a little bit about each one. I'm sure that I will dive into these each in more detail in future podcasts. And if you're interested in that, please let me know. You can reach out to me on social media if these solo episodes are helping you, or if you want to learn more. Also within my Keto For Women program and the Muscle Science for Women program, we dive into these different categories and different topics a lot as well in more detail. So definitely check those out if you're interested. So without further ado, let's get into the top 10 mistakes that I see women making when it comes to building muscle. All right, so diving into the 10 common mistakes that I see women making when it comes to trying to build muscle. And a lot of these mistakes that I see are kind of related to the overarching goal of changing body composition and, following a program and following a plan, but you're not really seeing the results that you think you should be seeing, or the body composition changes that you should be seeing with following a program. And so this is where I see a lot of women get really, really frustrated. They're putting the work in the gym. They're doing all the things they think they should be doing, and they're still not seeing the results that they think they should be seeing, right? And like I said, I made a lot of these mistakes in the past myself, and it's totally normal to, especially for females, to kind of make these mistakes. It's part of, growing and learning and getting better. And so I'm hoping that today I can just kind of open your mind to some of these things and make you think about them a little bit more. And, if you aren't seeing the results that you think you should be seeing with all the hard work that you're putting in, there might be some things in here that you can tweak or, start to focus on. So just, have an open mind as you listen to this. And these mistakes are not necessarily in any particular order. I have my notes here. I'm going to go through them and chat through each one. And like I said in the intro, we dive into a lot of these different topics in more detail in my programs, specifically the Muscle Science for Women program. If you're interested in that, the next round will be launching pretty soon. So if you want to get on the list for that, just go to my website, metflexlife.com. You can click on the programs tab and check out the Muscle Science for Women program there. You could also check out the Keto For Women program, which is more of a nutrition-based program, whereas the Muscle Science for Women program is more of a training program that does also have nutrition in it as well, but all the details are on my website. So check that out if you're interested. So anyway, let's get into the first most common mistake that I see women making when it comes to trying to build muscle. So the first one is not eating enough food to support muscle growth and recovery. So this is probably definitely on the top of the list for what I see time and time again with the clients that I work with. And again, a big mistake that I've made in the past. And it's just really being stuck in that dieting mentality and being stuck in that restrictive mentality and not eating enough in general to fuel your training, right? So we know that muscle is not just going to appear from nowhere, right? Like you have to fuel yourself appropriately. You have to obviously be putting in the work in the gym, and we'll go into all of that in a little bit and some other mistakes that I see. But in terms of fueling appropriately, specifically getting enough protein and making sure that you are staying on top of that on a daily basis is going to be very, very important when it comes to building muscle. Also, making sure that you're getting enough of the other macronutrients as well. And this is going to obviously depend on the individual, but when we're talking about incorporating carbs and even fats and things like that, they are all beneficial depending on the individual, depending on where the person's coming from, depending on their goals, all of that. So it's really important to just overall make sure that you are eating enough to support muscle growth and recovery. Recovery is something that we tend to forget about a lot. And this is one of the points that I'm going to go into in a little bit, so I won't dive in too deep into it now. But fueling appropriately is not just to fuel yourself for your workout, but to make sure that you're fueling your body and your muscles so that they can repair and rebuild after you've worked out. So during that recovery process, right? So another mistake under this category, so we're still under the first mistake here, is actually not tracking to see if you are eating enough, right? So going through a period of, tracking your food and making sure, a lot of people think that tracking just goes with, if you have a goal of fat loss or weight loss or whatever it may be, that is tracking macros, tracking calories and all of that. A lot of people see that with weight loss or fat loss, but I have seen, the mistake of not actually tracking the amount that you're eating when you are looking to actually eat enough. Especially for muscle growth. So not tracking to see if you're eating enough is a huge mistake underneath this category as well. And then another kind of subcategory to this has to do with hydration and sodium intake. So not paying attention to your hydration, obviously drinking water throughout the day, and then also not paying attention to the amount of electrolytes and sodium that you're getting throughout the day. This is all falling under that category of just not eating and obviously drinking enough to support that muscle growth and recovery. So sodium, electrolytes, those are all very, very important regardless of what type of, diet protocol you're following. Obviously with a lower carb, kind of whole foods based diet, it's going to be even more important to pay attention to sodium and electrolytes. But with any type of, protocol that you're following, making sure that you're staying on top of that is going to be super important, especially, as you're going into your workout. We know sodium is super important and it's been demonized for so long. And that actually in itself is a mistake, right? So I've recorded several podcasts in the past about sodium and the importance of it and electrolytes and the importance of those. But yeah, that would be the first kind of overarching mistake that I see, is just not eating enough to support muscle growth and recovery. The second mistake would be working out too much, thinking more is better and not recovering. And so you'll notice that a lot of these kind of go with each other. The mistakes that I'm listing out here, there's some overlap between them, but you'll kind of get the idea, hopefully. So the second one is like I mentioned, working out too much and thinking that more is better and just not giving yourself enough time to recover. This was a huge mistake that I made for many, many years. I always thought that I just needed to do more. I always thought that that was going to get me to the results that I wanted. If I did some, that was great. But if I kept doing more, then obviously more is better. And that's what I literally thought in my head. And that's what I see a lot of my clients thinking as well. But we're forgetting that recovery is a huge piece of the puzzle, especially when it comes to building muscle. So there's a big difference between hard work and being overworked, right? So if we think about hard work and working hard, you're going to feel, inspired. You're going to feel fulfilled and motivated in what you're doing. That is a sign of hard work or working hard. A sign of overwork would be, or a few signs of overwork would be you're feeling overwhelmed, you're burnt out, you're just exhausted, and even unmotivated to continue working out, right? So if you feel like any of those things, if you feel exhausted, unmotivated, obviously at certain times, like you're going to feel that way. But if it's a constant or chronic thing, then that is a sign that you are just either under recovering or you're just overworking and you're not you're just doing too much for what your body can handle. And that's something that I did for a long time, and I ended up getting injured. And that in itself basically forced me to stop doing so much. My body said, hey, I had enough. Like, you've been pushing me for so long, and I'm just going to basically, get injured and force you to stop, right? And so that's what I actually see too with a lot of people. They go so hard for so long and their body's just like, all right, I'm tapping out. And so you want to kind of, avoid that. Obviously, we want to avoid injury and being overworked. So working out too much and thinking more is better and not recovering. And then on the recovery side of things too, just to kind of talk about this a little bit, the ability to recover isn't just about having rest days, right? So rest days are super important. And I do believe, and this was me, like I used to think that I needed to work out 6-7 days a week. And like even on that 7th day, even if I did have a rest day, I would make it like a quote unquote active rest day where I'd go out and do a hike or something. So it really wasn't a rest day. But I thought that I needed to be working out that much to get the results. And then after I learned and I made a lot of mistakes and I grew and I realized that, working out, especially when it comes to lifting, 4 days a week is more than enough. I mean, you can go up to 5 days a week, but typically like 90% of you listening to this podcast do not need to be lifting more than 4 days a week. And that's just something that took me a long time to realize, but you have to give your body time to recover. And like I said, it's not just about those rest days. It also has to do with what's going on in the rest of your life as well. I talk about this a lot. We only have one stress bucket in our body, in our entire being. We only have this one stress bucket. And once you kind of add all these things into it and it starts to overflow, then that is a lot of the issues that we are seeing, because people tend to think that, exercise is a stress and we're told that it's a good stress, but it can be a bad stress if you overdo it. And then if you're combining that with all the other stress that's going on in your life from your work, your relationships, lack of sleep, other lifestyle factors that are going on, stress, all of that, these all play into each other. And your body doesn't know the difference between those different stressors. It's just going to be stressed. And if you have too much stress, especially if it's chronic, that is a bad situation. So like I said, the ability to recover isn't just about rest days. It also has to do with what's going on in the rest of your life. So if you're stressed out at work, if you're stressed out, at home with your family, if you're not sleeping, like all of these are things that you need to pay attention to, because those are going to hinder your ability to recover from your exercise, from your lifting sessions. And that in itself is you're basically going to be doing a lot of work and not getting the return on the investment that you're putting in for that work, right? And that's something that I did for years as well. So we have to realize too, busier people with more stressful lives and less time to recover are the ones who actually have to prioritize that recovery the most. So if you are someone who is every single day, you're super, super busy, you have tons going on in your life, and then you're still on top of that trying to get 5 days or 6 days in at the gym, you are the person who needs to take a step back and realize that you actually might be putting in a lot more work than you can reap the reward of, just because you have so many other things going on in your life. And so your body is just overstressed and overwhelmed. So there are, some people say, oh, like you can just implement more things like biohacks, like sauna, getting massages, things like that. Those things can help a little bit, like maybe sitting in the sauna for a little bit after your workout or before your workout, whatever it may be, getting a massage every other week or something like that. Like those are all great things. But they're not going to move the needle that much. You really, really, really need to be focusing on the big rocks. So sleep, stress management, nutrition, and having real downtime, like for yourself. Making sure that you're prioritizing your personal development and your personal rest and recovery, because that is going to be so important to be able to see results, right? So recovery is huge. It's a huge piece of the puzzle that I missed out on for so many years. And I promise you, if you just take a step back and think about, okay, what are some ways that I could be recovering a bit better? What are some ways that I could be making sure that I am getting the best bang for my buck when it comes to the work that I'm actually putting in at the gym, right? Or during your session or whatever, even if you're working at home, whatever it may be. I always say in the gym, but a lot of people are working out at home nowadays. So anyway, the kind of takeaway here is just making sure that you are recovering. You're not doing too much. You're not thinking more is better, because it tends to not be, really, if you're one of the people who thinks that. And there's different ways to gauge recovery, right? So you can just make sure that you're paying attention and tracking these things. So tracking your sleep quality, quantity. If you're always sore and you're always tired, that's probably a sign that you're overdoing a little bit. Or a lot. You don't want to be always sore. You don't want to be actually going into your next workout feeling super, super sore. That's a sign that your muscles are not recovered, and you're basically just going to have diminishing returns if you try to push further past that. Obviously, some soreness is a sign that, yeah, you're progressing, but if you're always sore, that's a sign that you might be doing too much. And then another common sign, like I said, is just having a little bit lower motivation and feeling like, each week you should be getting, excited about your workouts. If you're not getting excited about your workouts, if you're not motivated, if you're feeling low motivation, those are signs that, you might be doing too much, or you might need to switch things up. But just gauging your recovery and just making sure that you're paying attention to that is super, super important to, like I said, to make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck. I keep using that terminology, but it's really true. Okay, so moving on to number 3, I told you these would be, there's a lot of subcategories under each category, but number 3 is doing too much circuit style training, too much high intensity interval training, classes like Orange Theory, F45, CrossFit, things like that. Those exercise classes, especially like I did CrossFit for many years, they can be super beneficial. I did do Orange Theory for a little bit. I did F45 for a little bit. They can be super beneficial if you are someone who knows that you like to have that environment with other people around you. You like to be working out in a group. You like to have that competitive atmosphere. You like that kind of, like with CrossFit, there's a family atmosphere, which I absolutely love. That is really, really great. But the issue with that is that a lot of these classes tend to be those circuit style training classes where you're doing a lot of different things and you might not be actually progressing each, workout or each week, or you just might not be able to gauge that progression. And so the mistake here is that if the main goal is to build muscle and to change your body composition, yes, you can do that with, circuit style training, but it's definitely not going to be the most efficient way to do things if your main goal is to build muscle, right? So that's just something to think about. I'm not saying that you have to stop doing CrossFit or doing Orange Theory or whatever it may be, but it might be that you need to take a step back and just think about what your main goal is right now. And if you have been doing something like this for a long time and you've kind of been spinning your wheels and not seeing the results that you think you should be seeing, then there's probably a red flag there, right? There's probably something going on that we need to adjust. So that's just something to think about, right? So another thing here is feeling like, and I used to think this too, like if I wasn't like dead on the floor after my workout, making a sweat angel after my CrossFit workout, I feel like I didn't work hard enough. That's what I used to think every single workout. And that's not the case. You do not have to be dead on the floor in a sweat angel to have, gotten a good workout in. Sometimes in my workouts these days, I don't even sweat sometimes. Obviously that depends on the weather outside too, but there are times when I'm, lifting and I break a very minor sweat, right? So sweating does not correlate with a hard workout in the sense of when it comes to building muscle, right? Because first of all, everybody's different in the amount they sweat. Second of all, just because you're sweating, it doesn't mean that you're building muscle. That they don't, there might be some correlation there, but it's not like a causation, right? So that's another thing to think about. And then another thing under this category is thinking about, if you are going into your exercise session with the main focus of burning calories, or you're actually chasing that sweat, that's something that we have to rethink as well. Because if our main goal is to build muscle, you shouldn't be chasing the sweat. You shouldn't be chasing how many calories you're burning during that exercise session, because that's not what the focus is, and that's not what matters. And more often than not, a lot of people tend to overestimate the amount of calories that they're actually burning during exercise, which is a whole other podcast in itself. But if you continue to chase that rather than focusing on the other important factors that I'm going to continue to talk about in a second, then that is probably another mistake that you're making, right? So like I said, there's going to be subcategory mistakes under each of these main categories, but that's a common one that I see. And something that I always say is you want to focus on exercising to build, not to lose. And that's another mistake in itself, is when people go into their, lifting session or exercise session with the goal of, if their goal is fat loss, for example, or changing their body composition, they're going into that session thinking about burning as many calories as possible to lose as much weight as possible. If that's your mindset, you need to change that mindset, because that's only going to get you in more and more trouble as you go. It's going to only cause you to spin your wheels more and more. So thinking about exercising to build, not to lose, is something that's helped me a lot as I kind of go into my sessions, and realizing that I want to put in as much work that I can to build muscle. And if I'm focused on fat loss, then that's mostly going to come from my nutrition, and from being in a calorie deficit from that side of things. So that's something to think about. And then overall, with this third kind of general mistake, which I mentioned, is doing too much circuit style training and too much kind of high intensity training. This comes down to the training stimulus not matching your primary goal. And when I mean that, if your primary goal is to build muscle, like I mentioned, you want to do that in the most efficient way possible, right? And you want to be able to progress and challenge your muscles and put them under load and tension. And when we're doing circuit style training, when we're chasing, short rest periods and sweating and burning calories and things like that, that does not align with the primary goal. Obviously, there's going to be some times where you can include that type of training in your like in your training program. For example, if you're going through like a metabolic phase where the goal is to have short rest periods, then that's kind of a different story. But if our goal is to build as much muscle as possible, then we're going to be focused more so on hypertrophy style training, thinking more about that kind of bodybuilding style of training where you're progressively overloading. You have, structure and progression within your workouts, and you are focusing on that. And that actually brings me to number 4. So number 4, the fourth most common mistake that I see women making when it comes to trying to build muscle is not having any structure, not having any progression, and not having enough intensity when they go into their lifting session. So breaking these 3 things down: no structure, no progression, and not enough intensity. So with the structure side of things, if you're just doing random workouts that you see on Instagram, day after day, and you're just like saving these to your Instagram saved category or whatever, and then you're just going into the gym and following that random workout, that is, you're doing yourself a disservice, because you're literally just doing random stuff that has no structure, that has no progressive plan to it, and you're just making things a lot less efficient for yourself. So following a structured progressive program so that you can get the most bang for your buck is going to be super, super important. And if you do not know what a structured plan or program looks like, again, definitely check out my website. I have tons of programs for exercise programs specifically for all levels. If you go to my website, metflexlife.com/programs and scroll down, you'll see that I have different programs there. And then also if you want even more guidance with that and if you're a female, through the Muscle Science for Women program, that has a program in itself that is based off of progression and structure. And it's a program that is going to, allow you to do the least work and get the most results, because you're going to be very efficient at what you're doing, and you're going to be following a progressive overload plan that will allow you to actually, build muscle in an efficient way. So that's the first part of number 4. The second part of number 4, or the third part of number 4, is not enough intensity. So I already talked about the structure and the progression part. So not having enough intensity as you're, going through your training session. So if you are not putting in enough effort and intensity to have a sufficient stimulus and stress on the muscle to make it grow, then you're not going to grow. You need to make sure that you are challenging the muscle, that you are putting it under a sufficient stimulus so that it is forced to grow, right? And that's where muscle growth comes in. The more that you force it to the more that you force that stimulus, you go close to failure. Not saying they have to go to failure, and you probably shouldn't go to failure every time, but the closer you get to failure, the more you're going to challenge that muscle, the more you're going to challenge it to adapt. And the more that it adapts, it's going to grow, right? And so we just need to make sure that we have enough intensity with what you're doing, but also realizing that it's not just about what you're doing, but how you're doing it. And this goes alongside intensity, right? And effort, because you could put a lot of intensity and effort into something, but if you are not executing it properly, if you're not choosing exercises or working with a coach or following a program where you're picking an exercise that fits your personal anatomy and biomechanics, then you might be doing a lot more. You might feel like you're doing a lot more work, but still not getting the most out of it that you could. So that's where proper execution, proper technique comes into play, proper exercise selection, knowing, or not even having to know like what specific muscles work, exercises work which specific muscles. You don't necessarily have to know that, but you should be working with a coach or following a program where that is at the forefront, right? Because you don't want to be just doing random exercises, like I said, choosing exercises off of Instagram or whatever it may be. Because if you're doing an exercise and you don't realize, but it's working like your hamstrings day after day after day, right? What is that? Yeah, you're going to grow your hamstrings, but what about everything else, right? You need to be doing exercises that make sense in a specific order, in a specific progression, so that you're hitting all the, major muscle groups that you need to be hitting throughout the week, and, getting enough accessory and isolation workouts in as well, with specific muscle groups, that you are, getting a well-rounded program and you can progress from there. And that's going to come down to making sure that you're following a program that is, put together in a smart way, right? So that would be number 4, is overall no structure, no progression, and not enough intensity. And with that, I would add not enough intention for what you're doing. So that's a big overarching mistake that I see and that I've made myself. So that's number 4. Number 5, I'm going to speed through these a little bit more. Those were really the ones that I wanted to dive into, and that had a lot of subcategories within them. But number 5 is, and this kind of goes along with another one that I mentioned, but not tracking your workouts or your biofeedback. So this comes down to just, if you're not tracking, how much weight you're using in your workouts, how many reps you're doing, then how are you going to know if you're progressing week to week, right? There's no way that you're going to be able to remember, the workout that you did on Monday. There's no way you're going to be able to remember a week from now, exact amount of reps, exact amount of weight that you did for every single set. Maybe you'll remember a few of them, but if you're not tracking this, if you're not writing it down, if you're not using some type of Excel document or app or something where you can just track your workouts, then you're doing yourself a huge disservice, because how are you going to know if you're progressing week to week, right? We know that progressive overload is a huge part of building muscle. You must be progressing each week. I always talk about this, progressive overload is not just using more weight or doing more reps. There's so many different ways to progressively overload, but the main ones are being able to look at your logbook and over time see that you are advancing, right? Over time, not necessarily every single week, but over, a longer period of time, looking to see like, hey, did I do a little bit more weight than I did a few weeks ago? Did I do a few more reps than I did a few weeks ago? Okay, that's a good sign that I'm building muscle. That's a good sign that I'm progressing. And so if you're not tracking those things, how will you ever know? And then with that also comes tracking biofeedback. And when I see biofeedback, this is something that I track with all of my clients. There's all different types of biofeedback. The main things that I would focus on would be looking at, just tracking day to day. And you can use, with my clients, we use a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being feeling, like 1's the worst and 5's the best, right? So, and then you have obviously some in between. So if we're tracking, which we do, would be, day to day looking at recovery. So how recovered did you feel, going into your workout today or even after your workout on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being you felt like crap, 5 being you felt awesome. You weren't super sore, you felt good going into your workout. So, that was recovery, right? So recovery, energy throughout the day, how your sleep was, like your sleep quantity and your quality, because that's again going to play into your ability to recover. Like they all play into each other. How your hunger levels were throughout the day, that's going to play into it as well, right? Are you eating enough to support your goals? What else? There's tons of other biofeedback metrics, but those would be kind of the main ones. So sleep, your motivation to train. So going into your training session, how did you feel? Like on a scale of 1 to 5, were you feeling really good and excited about going into your training session, or were you kind of dreading it? So that would be motivation to train. What did I say? Recovery, motivation to train, your overall performance. So how you felt after your workout, like on a scale of 1 to 5, did you feel like the workout was okay? Like, was it kind of a mediocre workout? That would be more so like a middle ground, like a 3. Was it like the worst workout you've ever had? Or one of the worst in a while? Then that would be obviously more towards a 1. Or was like, did you come out of the workout feeling really good, still having energy, feeling really good about your lifts? Maybe you hit some PRs. Obviously that would be closer to a 5. So those are all, biofeedback metrics that you can track. And then over the course of the week, you can see how things went. You can start to correlate some things, right? So for example, if you had a really crappy night's sleep and then you went into a training session and it was just a really crappy training session, you might put those things together, as you're going throughout your day. But if you kind of look back at your tracker and you see, that day I got 5 hours of sleep and my quality was a 2. And then, look at my performance. It was a 2 and my recovery was a 3, right? So those things might be correlated. So it might mean, and they probably likely are, might mean that you just need to pay a little bit more attention to optimizing your sleep. And then that in itself will trickle and have a domino effect into everything else that you're doing, right? So these are all biofeedback metrics that are important and they all, coincide with each other. It's all looking at the bigger picture, and making sure that we can optimize as much as possible and, have you feeling your best, right? And we know that every day is not going to be the best, right? There's going to be days where you have crappy performance. Not every workout is going to be your best workout. I have, multiple workouts a month where I feel like it wasn't a great workout. But if you have more workouts, like if we're looking at a monthly period, and this is something that I like to focus on, making sure that more of my workouts during that month were better than the ones that weren't, right? So having a majority of the workouts feeling really good versus knowing that I'll still have a few that probably weren't that great. That's just normal. That's part of it. Obviously the goal is to have as many, lifting sessions and workouts where you finish feeling great and, all of that, but it's in reality, that's not going to be the case where every single workout for months on end are amazing, because that's just not real life. So that would be number 5, is like, if you're not tracking your workouts and your biofeedback, then you're missing out on a lot of things, because you could be, focusing on certain things to make things better and make things more efficient for yourself overall. All right. Number 6 is not being patient, right? So there's a quote that I came across a while ago. I actually wrote it down here. Knowing and accepting that it will take longer than you want it to. So when it comes to building muscle, we have to realize that it takes a lot of time. And with that, it takes a lot of patience. Building muscle is one of those things that, especially if you're not fueling appropriately, if you're not, if you're making kind of the mistakes that I just went through, the last 5 mistakes I just went through, those are things that you can start to focus on. But overall, no matter what, even if you're doing everything like 100% right, building muscle takes time. And also, the more advanced you are, the more time it's going to take, right? If you're kind of a newbie or you are just getting into following a progressive plan, you might see tons of results right off the bat. And that's pretty normal, right? Because it's a new stimulus, it's a new novelty thing that your body is experiencing. So that's normal. But as you continue to progress, as you get more advanced, it's going to just get slower and slower and slower. And that's just the unfortunate reality of building muscle. So that is the big piece of the puzzle when it comes to, changing your body composition, especially when it comes to building muscle. You have to be patient. So one thing with this too, especially when it comes to females, is that if we are going into a muscle building phase, we know that we are going to, if you're doing this in a way that is like you are committed to building as much muscle as possible in a period of time, and you are, say, going into like a slight surplus, right? You're going into a building phase. You are going to see the scale go up, right? So not for everyone, but if you are intentionally going into a building phase and the main goal is to build as much muscle as possible within a period of time, whether that's like 6 to 8 months, whatever it may be, you should be seeing the scale go up. And the reason for that is because if the scale's not going up, especially if you're more advanced, right? And we're not talking about body recomposition right now. We're talking about building muscle and doing it in the most optimal way possible, most efficient way possible. You need to be in a slight surplus, and therefore you need to see the scale go up a little bit. Because if the scale's not going up, then you're not building muscle to the capacity that you could be. Again, this is aside from the caveat of body recomposition, which is building muscle and losing body fat at the same time, which I've done several podcasts on in the past. Check those out. I'll link some of them in the show notes if you're interested. But you need to kind of understand, especially as a female, that the scale potentially will go up and should go up if your main goal is to build muscle. And so you might, start to feel a little bit uncomfortable with what's like how your body's changing, because with muscle growth, we know that a little bit of body fat has to come along with that. If we could just build muscle, that would be amazing. But for 99% of us, there has to, especially the more advanced you are, there will come a little bit of body fat with that muscle gain. Realize that doesn't have to stick around forever, especially if we're going through different phases. And that's something to think about too. Losing fat is a lot quicker of a process than building muscle. And so that's something that we need to think about as well when it comes to the being patient side of things. Building muscle takes a long time. It takes a lot of patience. It takes getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. And with that comes setting goals that are outside of aesthetics. So, setting goals that are related to your strength, your performance in the gym, your mentality, other things that are going on in your life, those are going to be important goals to set, especially in a building phase. I know when I was going through my building phase, I gained 15 pounds within that 8-month period. And I committed to that. I got comfortable with the uncomfortable. I got comfortable with, I got pretty comfortable with seeing that scale go up. I was never completely comfortable with it, and nobody usually is, but I, knew that it was part of the overall plan. And I, instead of focusing on that scale number going up, instead of focusing on, how I looked or felt in the mirror, I focused on, is my strength going up every single week? Yes, it was, at least every like a bi-weekly basis. Is my performance going up? That goes along with strength. Those are the things that I focused on. And if you are going into a building phase, you need to be primarily focusing on your performance, because that is going to be a telltale sign that you are building muscle if you are progressing, right? If you're doing, an extra rep or a little bit more weight, week after week or bi-weekly, like I said, doesn't have to be week after week, especially the more advanced you are. But if you are focused on that, then that is where the money's at. And then also realizing that there's other things that you can focus on too. And there's other goals that you can set from like a, mindset perspective, or focusing on other things within your, your personal life or your business. Those are the things, outside of the aesthetic side of things in a building phase is going to be important. And that all comes with realizing that, again, building muscle is a much slower process than losing body fat. And so that's something that we need to realize and kind of drill into our minds if our main goal is to build muscle and we're going into a building phase. Not saying that you have to go into a building phase to build muscle. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying if you are someone who is going into a building phase or in a building phase, you need to be focusing on some other things besides the aesthetic side of things, and you need to be patient with the process. So that's number 6. Number 7 is not being consistent. So this kind of goes back to the other one that I mentioned in terms of, following random Instagram workouts and like switching things up too often or not sticking to a solid plan. And this goes for both your workouts and your nutrition. If you're not being consistent with certain things, how are you ever going to know if they're working, right? And this is something that I tell a lot of my clients is that, if we implement some type of nutritional strategy or some type of workout plan, like we need to implement that for a good period of time to actually see if it's working, right? It's not like, oh, let's do one thing for one day. And if it doesn't work, then, oh crap, it doesn't work. That's not how it works when it comes to nutrition and training, right? We need to give it some time. Again, this goes back to the patience thing, but with this one, it's just not being consistent with what you're doing and trying to switch things up too often. So, if you're following a program, your program should be, you should be doing similar exercises or the same exercises week to week for at least like minimum 3 weeks, right? And this is because if you're constantly changing up your exercises, again, how are you going to know if you're progressing, right? How are you going to know if you're doing, a little bit more weight or, an extra rep or you're, focus more on, or you're improving your technique or your execution or whatever it may be. Like if you're switching things up constantly, like there's literally no way that you will know if you're progressing or not. And it's just going to be so much more confusing, right? You're just not going to have that metric to be able to track that. So number 7 is just not being consistent. That's a big mistake that I see. And along with that goes just trying to switch things up too often. So that would be number 7. Number 8 is, I actually kind of talked about this one already, but if you are in a building phase, if you're scared to see the scale go up, it's not necessarily a mistake, but it's something that, if you're not allowing yourself to see the scale go up, if you see the scale go up maybe like a few pounds and then you're like, oh crap, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm going to go back into a deficit. That in itself is, again, you're just going to continue to spin your wheels, especially if you are going into a building phase and if you've committed to that. And so when I bring my clients to a building phase, I say, before you even start, I say like, we need to commit, like I need to make sure that you are committed to this for at least 5 minimum months. 5 to 6 is like the minimum when it comes to building phase. Because remember I said, muscle building takes time. It takes a lot of time. So that would be mistake number 8 is just focusing more so on like the instant gratification side of things versus the long-term results that you're going to get. So if you're not thinking about where you're going to be, the overall mistake here is if you're thinking about where you're going to be at in 3 weeks from now versus thinking about where you're going to be at in 6-8 months from now, that is a mistake because that is focusing on the instant gratification versus the long-term results that you could be getting and the long-term gratification and satisfaction from that. So that would be mistake number 8 is, scared to see the scale go up, focusing on that instant gratification versus the long-term results. All right, number 9, this kind of goes along with number 8, but really, really focusing too much on the body image and kind of suffering from body dysmorphia. So this is very common, especially with females. Realizing that if your main goal is to build muscle, you are probably going to feel quote unquote fluffy at certain points. You're not going to look as lean as you're used to looking if you obviously were leaner before you went into this building phase. And accepting that there will absolutely be days that you just don't feel good in your skin is going to be a huge part of it. So especially for females going into a building phase, the mental health part of it is huge, right? And this is where working with a coach to guide you and keep you on path or joining a program that is legit is going to be super important because I know for me going through my building phase, if I didn't have a coach alongside me, helping me every single week, kind of allowing me to get out of my own head, I would not have continued on with it probably past like the first 2 months. And this comes down to, being okay with asking for help and being okay with realizing that, you shouldn't be doing this alone, right? And the best athletes, the best, physique competitors, the best bodybuilders, they all have coaches. The best in the world all have coaches, right? And so if you're trying to do this alone and, you've tried in the past and you haven't seen the results you want, then, it's going to be time to either hire a coach or join a program that you trust. That's just what it is. So this is number 9. The biggest mistake is feeling like you need to do it on your own, or just not asking for outside help, because that is just going to cause you to continue to spin your wheels and add to a lot of frustration and a lot of wasted time. So with that being said, if you are, interested in working with me as a coach, I do offer one-on-one coaching. You can go to my website, metflexlife.com/apply, and you can check out what coaching involves. And you can apply to work with me one-on-one. Or if you want to check out any of my programs, like I mentioned, you can go to my website and go to that program tab. The website's metflexlife.com/programs. You can check out my programs there. And then, feel free to reach out with any questions as well. And then number 10 is number 10 mistake is letting your ego run the show. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different things I can go into with this one, but the biggest thing is, a lot of people think of ego as being overconfident, right? And so that is one piece of it, but there's also other sides to ego. So there's lack of confidence. There's overconfidence, obviously. There's feeling like, the saying imposter syndrome, feeling like an imposter if you're going into the gym and you're not really sure what you're doing, right? That's obviously goes along with lack of confidence, negative self-talk, comparing yourself to others. These are all part of your ego. And so if you're letting your ego run the show, you're not going to get the results that you want and that you should be getting. So all the examples that I just mentioned are all examples of your ego slowing things down for you. So the more that you can let go of that, the more you can let go of, focusing on what other people think, the more you can let go of, not having enough confidence. Obviously, that's a huge one. That's hard, right? Confidence is hard. That's something that, everybody's working on. But the more you can kind of let go of that and even just work on letting go of that this comes back to the mindset side of things and also working with a coach as well. I know my coach has helped me a lot with the mindset side of things and letting go of my ego and, going into the gym and, depending on what exercises I'm doing, letting go of my ego in the sense of dropping the weight and really focusing on my execution and my technique and really kind of stimulating the muscle that I'm trying to stimulate, because I know that that's where the most growth is going to come from, especially if the goal is hypertrophy. That in itself is a huge piece of it when it comes to building muscle. I know that when for a lot of exercises, when I started to drop the weight and really, really focus on intention and focus on execution, that's where the most change came from. So number 10 would be letting your ego run the show is a huge mistake that I've made in the past, and I see a lot of people making as well. And kind of getting past that is one of the biggest things that can also help with, obviously seeing results, right? So that would be those would be the top 10 mistakes that I've seen over the years, that I've made myself over the years when it comes to building muscle, and specifically with females. I mean, it's not just for females. A lot of males make these mistakes as well, but this is kind of geared towards what I've seen in a lot of my female clients. Especially if the goal is to change your body composition, the number one mistake is just not building muscle, right? That's like the overarching mistake, is not focusing on building muscle and realizing that that's where the physique that you want is going to come from. If you lose body fat and you have no muscle underneath that body fat, you're not going to look how you want to look. You're not going to look toned. You're not going to look lean. And it's just going to be, you're going to kind of waste a whole bunch of time that doesn't need to be wasted if you focused on prioritizing building muscle, and not just for aesthetic and physique goals, but for overall health and longevity and everything, right? Muscle is so important to all aspects of your life. And it does come down to also the mental side of things. Like when you're in the gym, lifting heavy weights, seeing your body composition change over time, that in itself is going to make you feel so much more confident and give you so much empowerment. And I see it, day after day with all of the female clients that I work with as they, continue to grow, and with myself as well. It's so empowering, and there's so much benefit that comes from focusing on building muscle. And you really, unless you go into it and you commit to it for a while, you're not gonna get that benefit. So we really need to focus on kind of thinking back to, all the mistakes that I just mentioned, and seeing, where there can be areas that maybe you can focus in a little bit more on. If you're listening to this and you're like, oh man, I'm making all of these mistakes, don't worry. I was there. Trust me. Just to start to focus on one thing at a time. Think of the thing that you feel is going to move the needle the most, right? Even maybe listen back to this podcast or check out the show notes. There'll be kind of a summary of everything in the show notes, and just think about where you can start, right? That's the biggest thing. Just start somewhere and progress and go from there. So hopefully you took away some value from this episode. If you have any questions or any follow-ups, please feel free to reach out to me on social media. My handle's at rachelgregory.cns. And you can check out my website, metflexlife.com, has all previous podcast episodes, tons of blog posts, recipes. Check out my YouTube channel with all of the interviews from my podcast on that, and lots more. So I appreciate you listening. And if you found value from this, it would always be awesome if you could leave, if you haven't already, if you could leave a 5-star rating and a review on iTunes. That really helps to get the word out about the show. It helps us rank a little bit higher on iTunes so that more people see the show and listen to it, and it helps us grow. So I'd really appreciate that. And I will chat with you next time.